I'm Dan Smolin. I built a successful executive career in marketing and communications before becoming a top headhunter and founding my own executive search firm. Now get this, every day, mainstream media runs stories in which old school bosses and thought leaders frame your work and workplace issues in ways that are often divisive and unmeaningful. And that's just crazy. The time has come for you to answer the question, what's your work fit? So that your work and career fit who you are, how you want to live, and what you want your lasting contributions to be. What's your work fit? It answers your questions and tackles the issues that keep you up at night about advancing your career in this time of workplace revolution. So let's get started. Hey, good day, everyone from the United States and across the globe. This is Dan Smolin. Welcome to What's Your Work Fit? I am truly excited about our show today. I've been looking forward to this for a very long time. We'll get to that in a minute. One late breaking headline. I learned within the hour that Facebook Live was having some transmission problems. If you are watching us on Facebook Live and you're having some issues, go find us at our What's Your Work Fit channel on YouTube or over on LinkedIn. Join us there. We'd love to have you ask your questions of our guests. It's going to be a really great show. And before we get to our intro, some personal business here. I'm looking for sponsorships for this show. If you sponsor this show, you are going to lead a revolution in the future of work. You can reach out to me at dansmolin.com. We can talk about my mission here and what I think you'll be able to get out of this. Again, great opportunity if you've got a brand that's very forward thinking to align with our audience and what we're trying to do. So thank you very much for that. Let's get to it. Our guest today is let me get you in a better shot here, is the inimitable Bret Packard. Bret is an esteemed career professional, a senior executive in the global financial space. And this is the cool about Bret. He supported a daily journaling regime throughout his career where he captured the daily pearls of wisdom that he learned along the way in becoming a great and intentional leader. And when he emerged from, what is it, Bret, 88 journals, you had timeless insight that really empowers a lot of people who are working currently today. Now, as founder and host of the Packard Network on YouTube, Bret brings back those key insights from his journals to help others become amazing leaders at work. Good day, Bret. Great to see you.
Great to see you, Dan. Good morning to you, and good afternoon to those of you, I guess, in Europe and other parts of the world. But it's great to be on your program to talk about a really important topic. So I've been looking forward to it as well.
So what's the topic? The topic was teed up by a really incredible young man named Kojo. Kojo is about 24, 25 years old, born in Ghana, which makes sense. It's a Ghanaian name. But he lives in Park Slope, Brooklyn. He works in the financial services space. He loves it. But he asked the question, which I'm hearing from a lot of young people right now, which is, how do I become a workplace leader? So, Bret, how does Kojo get it started? How does he become a workplace leader?
It's a great question, and I'm glad, Kojo, that you've asked that question. A lot of people don't ask that, and then they wonder why later, when they were, let's say, a really high-performing individual contributor and they get into leadership, why people aren't following the leader. And so your question's really important. So my gratitude goes out to you for asking this. So Dan,
Mm-hmm.
and Kojo, I would say that that just a little bit of a backdrop here, that the biggest the key to becoming a workplace leader is to actually, one, figure out how an antiquated 1970s born shareholder first, profits before people culture
Mm.
in most companies. I'm not going to say every company, but most countries around the world. I've worked across 30 countries, and all 30 had profits before people,
Mm-hmm.
at least when I came into it. And I'm proud to say that many of those that I left had a people before profits culture. But just to set everybody's expectation, that's the first step to becoming a workplace leader, is how can you learn the profits before people system so that you can successfully navigate it and be an effective leader that has a highly engaged following. That's really number one. Number two, Dan, what I would say, and Kojo, is to you have to prepare yourself to solve problems and to navigate adversity. A lot of people are great coming out of getting the degree. I had a degree. It was a
Mm-hmm.
basic, it took me 5 years, but it was basic 4-year degree. Um, the textbooks are great background. I'm very pro education, but the thing that is not taught in school or business school for that matter, I've had lots of MBA students working for me from around the world,
Mm-hmm.
some of the best universities. They don't teach how to successfully engage, lead, and navigate through adversity. If things are fine, things are in a static environment, it's great. But if a recession hits all of a sudden, like many are saying may happen next
Right.
year, don't know. I don't know that. Or I went through three of these things. The Asian
Mm-hmm.
financial crisis in the late 90s. I was in Asia Pacific, Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, Hong Kong, Philippines, Korea. Those countries that were impacted by the where it started in Thailand. Um, Learning a lot through that crisis was important. And then 9/11, I was in Japan when 9/11 happened, and it just
Mm-hmm.
caused chaos in the financial markets, the aftermath, and then the global financial crisis in Europe, the Middle East, and Africa, 6 Southern Africa countries. So learning how to navigate adversity. We can talk in more detail about any of these, Dan, but I would say those two things. Number one, understand that the system today is flawed, but you have to work with it because it's there. This profits before people. And how can you do your part to flip it over and turn it into a people before profits? And number two, to learn
Mm-hmm.
how to solve complex problems amidst adversity. Those are the two things that I would say that's how you become a workplace leader. There's a lot there.
Now, Kojo, I hope I'm not misrepresenting you. You, I believe, said to me that you like being an individual contributor, but what you want to learn is to be able to be self-possessed and also self-directed. And so that got me thinking about avatars, Brett. And I'm going to put something up on the screen here.
Mm.
Bear with me. There are two classic images here. Now, the top one, guys like Brett and me know about. That's Coach Vince Lombardi, the greatest coach of all time. I
Mm.
mean, anybody of a certain age, that name, puts a smile on our faces.
Mhm.
But there's also the facilitator, um, which in this time and place where the workplace is changing, where people like Kojo want to be able to do more for themselves and also for others, is the most actionable avatar. Is it being a coach? Is it being a facilitator? Or, Brett, Is it an amalgam of the two? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, clearly, and great illustration to discuss this point.
Mm-hmm.
It's a hybrid. It's the
Mm-hmm.
latter, and the reason it's the latter, a lot of people in today's, you can go on to LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, any program where they talk about leadership, like you and I are doing, culture. You'll most of the people will jump to the bottom one, the facilitator, and the that's great, and that's important. The soft skills are really important,
Mm-hmm.
but I say it's a hybrid for the following reason: because of the adversity and the constantly changing landscape that businesses are faced, that just being a facilitator isn't good enough. Facilitation, what is it? Okay,
Mm-hmm.
it's a combination of influence and a whole bunch of other soft skills. To just make it short, um, an empathetic leader, a collaborator, somebody that is able to pull people together regardless of your title. Those skills are critical in
Mm-hmm.
today's world. And they also work well in a 1970s antiquated system that we're in as well, because what's happening now, especially in the pandemic economy, is that
Mm-hmm.
for leaders and managers that don't have that facilitation, the empathy skills and the other soft skills that we can talk more about,
Mm-hmm.
um, um, people are quitting, and they're repelling from those types of leaders.
Mm-hmm.
So it is now part of hygiene to have facilitation if you're going to have an engaged workforce. You've got to have the coach, the Vince Lombardi, the understanding, the experience. Even if you don't have a lot of it, you've got to know how to rally that around you through your circle, to get plenty of diversity in there, and people that understand that, this might be working well today, but what happens if there's another lockdown next September? Are you prepared for that? As an example, what happens if there's a recession?
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's talk about inflation.
Right.
Nearly everybody around the world is feeling the pinch of inflation. And we're not going to talk about the causes of that. The fact
No.
is, you're paying more for eggs, you're paying more for fuel. That's the bottom line. So, what did businesses and individuals, in this case, this question is coming from an individual,
Mm-hmm.
what have you uh, what did you do to prepare for that inflation? What was your debt position? What was
Right.
your skilling, et cetera? Because the skills today required to successfully navigate corporate or an entrepreneur are very different than they were a year ago, just because of inflation.
So, at one point in my career, I was an individual sales contributor. So I understand the role of the coach. That got me through tough quarterly reporting. So I made sure I made my bogey or exceeded it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That coach was keeping me focused on making sure the pipeline was not only full, but meaningful, and had the right types of prospects in it. The facilitator, on the other hand, would look to see how I was doing and to see, Dan, do you need a little help with the preparation side of it? Um, or, you seem a little down. Is everything going all right at home? Do you need some time off? We'll
Mm.
figure out a workaround so that the coach part of me makes sure you're hitting your numbers. Does that sound
Mhm.
about right in this kind of day
It
to day
is.
grind?
It is, and it's I use the analogy of a smartphone. If we want to just bring everything to current work, everybody can relate to it. You've got a smart. Let's say you get a new iPhone. We
Yeah.
all know that excitement when you take it out of the box and you turn it on, and if you immediately try to make a phone call without doing the activation procedures, it's not going to work.
Yeah,
So
right.
the hardware is on. The software, okay, requires a bit of programming, updating a SIM card, what have you. I think you get the
Mm-hmm.
point. And that's the facilitation part that you have. So let's say in your example, the hardware's the coach. You've got to have that, but you've also got to have the software components. You've got to have specifically We've talked a little bit about empathy, but you've got to, instead of just thinking of tasks, which is the hardware, which is what you had to do as an individual contributor,
Right.
you need to think about things in a team perspective, a collaboration perspective. Instead of thinking about your process to get those sales done, you want to start thinking, instead of just process, you want to start thinking about people. Okay, and how that engagement happens both with the customer as well as with your colleagues and your manager. Another example would be the plans. You had a sales plan as an example. Okay.
Yeah.
So instead of just the plan, what about the culture and the ecosystem that informs the behavior of everybody around you? And that's where culture and ecosystems become very, very important too. So it's basically both. And many people don't have both.
So
And
let's talk about that, because this feels to me like a C-suite crisis and opportunity at the same time.
mhm.
I get the feeling, and correct me if I'm wrong, that people in the C-suite will treat these avatars as separate and distinct characterizations. That feels like a mistake to me. Does it to you?
Yeah, I think it is. If you're going to do anything sustainable, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
let's say that you've got a C-suite looking at, well, first of all, only the coaching perspective, and that's going to clearly lead to burnout and clearly lead to things like in the United States, the Great Resignation that we've seen and starting to see in other parts of the world.
Right.
If you have a facilitator only soft approach, you have the software with no hardware to put that software, you're never going to deliver any numbers. You're going to fail. Everybody's going to get fired, and it's not going to be a pretty picture. And if the C-suite, back to your question, is looking at each differently, the problem with that, Dan, is that that every human being, every person of the team is one person. So they can't be looked at, well, half of you I'm going to coach and the other half facilitate. You've got to look at the whole person. And that's where the ecosystem makes a lot of sense. Another analogy I'll give you is that if there's different types of fish. I don't know how many types, but there's freshwater fish and saltwater fish. Okay. A lot of C-suite, they're looking at these things separately, like you mentioned. And what they need to be looking at is saying, for what we need to do as an organization from a balance perspective, do I need to have saltwater or freshwater? And because mixing it up isn't going to work well for anybody in the equation. So that's where the C-suite needs to spend time is, and that water, salt or fresh, is the ecosystem and the culture. How do you set goals for your people? Do you allow them to have input into their success? Do those goals have a personal purpose as well as the bottom line impact, a revenue impact? So a lot of it is talking about how you do things, and that's where the C-suite is failing in many companies, including Wall Street firms. You did a post about this just the other day about Morgan Stanley, I think. And so looking at things from a shareholder only perspective might be, let's say, saltwater, but maybe freshwater is more appropriate for the type of economy that we're in now. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And you brought up the point about Morgan Stanley, and I'm very familiar with the company, as a lot of us are. They, for 2 years, tried gently, I suppose, to cajole people back into the co-location. And then last week, they put the hammer down and said, everybody back, or, you run the risk of getting fired, which may be short-term effective, but I wonder about its efficacy long-term in terms of retaining top talent. So let's dig into that a little bit, Bret. Morgan Stanley's headquarters is in Manhattan, in New York City. Their youngest, what I'll call up-and-comer executives, probably can't afford to live in New York City proper, in Manhattan or the outer boroughs. They might be taking the train in. I factor in 2 hours a day, so that's, I'm sorry, 4 hours a day, maybe as much. That's 20 hours a week. Setting aside the expense, the fact that these folks are getting up really early in the morning, not getting home till late at night, and probably getting home completely spent and exhausted. And yet, I don't see companies like Morgan Stanley outwardly trying to solve the problem of enticing people who are young up and comers to be in the office in the first place, because there's not a lot of opportunities for residential real estate for those folks in the mere vicinity of that headquarters location. Now, I'm not going to be naive. I am sure that the C-suite understands that. But what they may not be able to do is figure out, if I want my folks to be here, to be present, I may need to do something to make it actually happen. Do you have any thoughts about the disconnect that big companies have in ordering everybody back, when in fact they may be stressing those workers more by getting them back to that 20-hour-a-week commuting regime and everything that's associated with it? And I will add one more element, and it's the work fit element. The fact that there's this feeling within many C-suites of, I need to own my people. I need to own their time while they're here, while they're on the clock. I'm sure you have thoughts on this, Bret. Go for it.
Yeah, I do, and again, it's a deep question, so I'll try to just make a couple of points from this. And first of all, I'll share some views from overseas. I'm obviously connected. My network goes deep into Asia, as an example, and I was talking to several people in Asia the past couple of weeks about this very point. And one of my ex team members, ex leaders, is actually working for a foreign bank in Singapore. And she is basically, I said, you're working from home, you're working in the office, and it's purely, she's in product development in the wealth space. And basically it's purely optional. Talk to somebody else in Hong Kong, which is going through, it's more complicated in Hong Kong because of COVID protocols and how they're managing COVID, but basically a lot more remote. But there's a current trend to bring people into the office, and at the same time, there's a lot of Hong Kong permanent Hong Kong native residents that are fleeing the country right now to look for other spaces as well. So it's complicated by this overseas, but back to your point about Morgan Stanley and other big U.S. firms, I would say that they are aware of it. But I would say if you look at the attrition, there's one indicator there that there's a big fail somewhere. Okay. Yes. Secondly, you can then look at, well, what's the leading indicator of attrition? Well, engagement is a huge one, right? Whether people are being vocal about it or they're just voting with their feet and leaving as well. So they're aware of that. And I personally think that a big part of this, what Morgan is doing, is cost cutting, is an intentional other benefit of it as well. So I think they're very aware of it. And I think that that's a way to get cost out, just by getting people to quit. That's my take on it from the big Wall Street firms in the U.S. So oftentimes, one of the things that, when you asked me the first question today that we gave some advice on, is to learn how the 1970s antiquated system of profits before people works. You learn to look at things like this and say, maybe there's more to the story than just work from home, come into the office. Maybe it's intentionally designed to do it that way. And I think there's going to be a lot of people that actually do quit. You know, Dan, people have had to deal with this commute issue in greater New in the greater New York City area for I don't know for how long, for a long time, right?
100
And
years. 100
a
years.
hundred years, yeah. And so, but what's happening now, and I think the pandemic accelerated this, is that people, especially the younger generations, were brought up differently. They're brought up with technology where things are very convenient, yet at the same time they want to have a purpose, and they want to make an impact on the world. And those are in direct contradiction to this 1970s antiquated system, which is why you see a lot of things don't fit together right now. And we have to do the things that you and I are talking about on this program until that does change. Eventually it will change, but it's not going to change anytime in the near future. It's going to be slash and burn if the revenues aren't coming in, and you're going to have radical things. So I think the answer to your question in summary, Dan, isn't quite simple in black and white, in my view. I think it's by design. It's very intelligent, what's behind it. And it's a way to get the cost out. And at the same time, probably raise the salaries of fewer people. I mean, this is how things work. I'm not advocating it, but I know how things work. You get cost out, then you can afford to give more money to other people who are probably free to work remote anyway.
Right.
You know what I mean? As long as you are on top and you deliver your numbers, et cetera, these big investment bankers at Morgan Stanley are going to probably live the lifestyle that they want to live. And then they're going to get a raise from all this.
Probably. And and I think management in the C-suite, they hold on to those old avatars that, like Coach Lombardi, who made his team stay on the field, leave nothing on the field, and play hurt and give it everything they got, which this all sounds well and great and everything. But this pandemic awakened something in a lot of people to say, wait a minute. I know my dad did that. I mean, geez. I mean, when I worked in the ad space in New York City and I would leave my home before 6 and not get home before 8, people would tell me, but you're doing so well. I mean, but I wasn't doing well, Brett. I was falling apart mentally, physically, and emotionally. And I think the latest generation of the workforce is a lot smarter than we were. And they're looking at this and saying, I want work to be a good fit into my overall day, so that, it's joyful, but, it gets broken up a little bit because I need to be present. There's, I think, a difference between being focused and being present. I can be heads down, focused on my work, but only for so long. I mean, I could give it a few hours. I can't give it an 8 or 10 hour stretch. People aren't really built to endure that long term, I think.
I agree. And that's why you have things like burnout. But I think it's important to look at this through a generational lens, like you just mentioned, because if you look at it through I'm borderline, Gen X and baby boomer, right? Born in 1964. Yeah. So it's a very different type of mindset that I grew up with, the discipline of, and you know this, Dan, but maybe the viewers don't, that I grew up under the profits, productivity, deliver numbers at any cost type of concept. It took me 19 years to understand that, it's not really, leaders' job is not to influence behavior. It's to understand that behavior and then to create or change the ecosystem, to lever that behavior for the good of everybody. Okay. Right. And that's really what it took me 19 years to learn that. And that's why I'm probably a bit different. And that's why you don't see a lot of C-suite focused on this, because they haven't learned. They don't know any other way. They've got the CEO breathing down their neck. And by the way, this doesn't stop at the CEO and the C-suite. It goes through the board, through to the shareholders. And that's why I keep bringing up the 1970s antiquated system, that people are just doing what they're paid and encouraged to do. And if they don't do it, you're fired. And that's really what it comes down to. So I'm not painting doom and gloom, but I'm painting reality for the younger generations, that if you do these two things that I'm talking about, you learn how to navigate this system full of defects. So you heard it right here. It's got all kinds of problems, right? You learn how to successfully navigate that. And at the same time, you build your skills on how to solve problems. I know that you, the younger generation, because of your values and what you're going to do and your burning desire to make an impact on this world, you're going to be given that shot, because these other people are going to retire away. They're going to become irrelevant because they're not going to have people working for them, especially the younger generations. You can then take over if you do these two things in the future.
I think you've done a real brilliant job laying out for people like Coach O how to shape their frame for leadership, which is to say, learn from the past. And oh, by the way, I was in the same past as you. Recessions, started in a really bad job market, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think that adversity, I learned from it. It made me smarter. Great lesson. You also imparted to people like Coach O that they have to look to different frames of leadership, not just the coach, not just facilitator, but an amalgam of it. That's great. Here's the problem, Bret. You and I can't do this alone. We need the middle managers who are watching today to light a fire under this process so that they lead the future leaders. So you must have some thoughts about, that manager who is stuck between the P&L and the head count. And they have a big job, especially in this fourth quarter where senior managers are breathing down their necks to say, squeeze out more profitability, even if that means laying off people. But there should be some positivity here for those folks who I think are stuck in the middle of this conversation. They're all really hardworking. They take their job seriously. But I feel like sometimes they don't have enough spotlight on perhaps the biggest part of their leadership vacuum. And that is the leadership to teach others on their team how to lead, how to be self-sufficient, but also how to lead others themselves. So how do we do that? How do we frame this opportunity for the people watching us today who are, again, middle managers who are like, that's all great. How do I do it?
Yeah. And I think that's going to start with something I'm going to throw out there that a lot of people don't know about. A lot of people do, but most people don't know about. They hear a lot about IQ, EQ. You and I slightly touched on EQ earlier. AQ, adversity quotient. This is where it starts. So specifically to your question, Dan, middle managers, understand what an adversity quotient is. All you need to know are three things to drive up your AQ, because it all starts right there. Number one is don't blame this system. Don't blame the C-suite. Don't blame yourself for being in this situation. I know that it's stressful, but it's an opportunity, as Dan mentioned. And number three, there is an exit door, and it's not about resigning. It's about doing these things that we're talking about, stick to your values. Do you have to deliver? You have to deliver. Sorry, that paycheck is coming in. You have to deliver. But look at and challenge the way that your organization has always delivered before, and show that you can do it a better way. Okay. I've done this throughout the latter part of my career, not the earlier part of my career. I was a compliance soldier. The latter part of my career, that was 19 years. The last 11 years, okay, I challenged everything and I did things my way. And guess what? Delivered a multiple of the bottom line results that we did before, because I had people with me. So specifically, focus on getting followers. Okay, we're talking about business, a job, your career, not talking about Facebook followers. We're talking about you get people to follow you by focusing on these things as well. It's contagious. It's very powerful, because this is what the 1970s antiquated system is lacking.
Right.
And they might have the HR department doing an engagement survey once a year, but it's not embedded in the DNA. So you focus on what you're good at: collaboration for an impactful purpose. That's something that that these middle managers are great at as well. You understand you need to deliver. Make sure you deliver. It may not be pretty how you deliver. So I'll give you an example, a sales example that you get a couple of really, really, really good people that can over deliver and compensate for the time that it will take you to implement these things that we're talking about with a broader group of people, because you've still got to bring in your numbers. So you find a way to cover your base. I always did that. But then I would spend 80% of my time. Okay, I would give these people at the top whatever they want. I call them elite performers. And then I would spend my leadership attention on the rest of the village. Okay, making sure that people are self-sustainable. And instead of doing things individually, as an example, redo the goals and let people set their own goals. And maybe they should be team goals instead of individual goals. Your C-suite's not going to have a problem with you doing all of this. And what you're doing is you're building not only the business for the future, Dan, but what you're doing is you're building a following that is going to become bigger, especially when it compounds, than the current business is itself. And then you become, the most powerful word of today, a relevant middle manager, because you're affecting change, and you're changing that salt water to fresh water. And that's really what I want the middle managers watching this to do, is you're going to change that. You're going to deliver. Okay. And you're going to make it happen. It may not be pretty, but what you're going to do is you're going to create a new ecosystem where people are going to collaborate. They're going to work together for a bigger purpose, and they're going to deliver a multiple of the profits by putting people before profits. You're going to beat this 1970s system.
I'm gonna leap onto that last point about people before profits, because Bob Iger's back in the CEO chair at Walt Disney Company. Bob Iger is not afraid to stop and say hello to the person pushing a broom at Walt Disney World in the back lot, or the cast member who is cleaning rooms or doing, something that typically doesn't get seen by a lot of guests. So that, again, is an opportunity for the C-suite to follow Bob Iger's lead, put people first, and the people being your talent. The people being your talent. Bret, we've run out of time here, and I'm sorry we didn't get to viewer questions. I think they were so engaged in what you were saying, Bret, that they were like, okay, I'm just going to listen here. So that's okay. But now comes the time where I want to get to ask you, what's your work fit? What attribute, condition, experience, place, or state of mind makes work a part of your day doing many meaningful things, Bret, and not the day? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, and my thoughts are simple on this, and fortunately, I built the 2/3 of my career outside of my home country, where I was basically an expatriate in other countries, right? And the thing, so my personal work fit is legacy, and what do people say about me? Because one of the things that I did, in addition to doing my job, delivering the profits, promoting people, changing ecosystems, is that I appointed people, local staff in the countries that I operated in, to take over for me when I left. And I'm so proud of these people. But equally importantly, the answer to your question is, these people are proud of me even today. I get text messages every morning from tellers, cashiers, depending on where in the world you are, in a bank. I was a banker in Zambia, saying, "Good morning, Bret. Wishing you a wonderful day." And then there's a handful of them that say, have a great evening. There's a big time difference between here and there. And that, to me, is the ultimate payoff of purpose, is that I impact. And I haven't been, Dan, to Zambia in more than a decade.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I spent 3 years in that part of the world. We did an amazing thing. We changed the salt water to fresh water, and the people still remember it to this day, but they don't remember the profit, the turnaround that we had because the copper price had dipped. What they do remember is how I made them feel. And to me, that's my work fit, is how do I make somebody feel? So if I see a great post on LinkedIn, for example, when you and I get done from here, I'm going to make somebody feel it and make them feel good. And so I do things with that intention. That's my fit as well. And because someday when I'm gone, I think it'd be great if people would remember how I made them feel. And hopefully that's a good feeling, not a bad feeling.
I love it. I thank you so much. Bret, before we depart, I'm wondering if you could point our viewers to your social media. Now, I know you're on YouTube as the Packard Network. Is that where they find you?
Yeah, they can find me on YouTube. Less insight there, more. I have insightful conversations with people that are performing at the elite level in all different industries on the YouTube channel, the Packard Network. But the best way for the deepest insight is LinkedIn under my name. You see right here on the screen, Bret Packard. Follow me here because you're getting daily extracts from these journals that Dan mentioned earlier. There's 89 of these books. They're in the closet right behind me. And this is what I went through. It doesn't mean it's the right way. There's also, I share my failures along the way as well. But this is the real world scenarios. And so you can learn an awful lot. But more importantly than what I write, you can engage with me and you can ask questions about, you know, Bret, what do you think about this particular topic based on your experience or inexperience as well? And so the best way to reach me is on LinkedIn. You can find me on Instagram and Facebook, but that's kind of the light touch, and the heavy deep dives are on LinkedIn.
I agree with you on LinkedIn. It's really, it's the center of my universe now. Bret Packard, thank you so much. I hope we can get you back on What's Your Work Fit.
You betcha.
And last of all, to Kojo, thank you, young guy.
Thank you, Kojo. Great question.
Your question was great. See you soon, Bret. Take care.
Thanks, Dan. Appreciate it.